This isn't just a quarterback decision. Something much bigger is unfolding inside the Cleveland Browns facility right now. And if you're looking at it like a normal offseason competition, you're already behind on what's really happening. Because this isn't about who takes the first snap in week 1. This is about a franchise drawing a line in the sand and finally choosing a direction after years of instability, missed expectations, and constant resets at the most important position in football. It's the kind of move that doesn't just affect a depth chart, it reshapes the identity of the entire organization, from the locker room to the front office to the way this team is going to be perceived across the league. For years, Cleveland has been stuck in a cycle that fans know too well. New quarterbacks arrive with hype, with promise, with the belief that this time things will finally be different, and then something breaks. Whether it's injuries, inconsistency, or internal dysfunction, the result has always been the same: uncertainty. That lingering feeling that no matter how talented the roster might be, the foundation just isn't solid enough to hold it all together. And when that uncertainty lives at the quarterback position, it spreads. It affects how coaches call games, how players prepare, how the locker room believes. It turns every season into a question mark before it even begins. But what's happening right now doesn't feel like another question. It feels like an answer, and not a quiet one either. This decision was made internally with a level of conviction that people around the building aren't used to seeing. No drawn-out competition, no hedging, no "we'll evaluate as we go." Just a clear, direct commitment that signals something far more serious than a typical off-season storyline. The kind of commitment that immediately changes how everyone else in the building operates, whether they're ready or not. At the center of all this is Shedeur Sanders, a player who hasn't even taken a regular season snap yet, but is already carrying the weight of a franchise shift on his shoulders. And what makes this even more intense is that he didn't walk into a quiet situation. He stepped into a room with established names, with expectations already in place, with veterans who weren't brought in to step aside. So when this decision came down, it didn't just elevate him, it sent a message to everyone else. A message that the future is being built right now, and not everyone is part of that plan. And that's where things start to get complicated, because when a move like this happens, it doesn't stay contained, it spreads. It creates reactions, both public and private. It challenges egos. It forces players to confront where they really stand. And in Cleveland, those reactions are already starting to surface, especially when it comes to a name like Deshaun Watson, whose presence alone adds another layer of tension to an already volatile situation. The moment this shift became real, the entire dynamic of that quarterback room changed, and not everyone is handling it the same way. And what makes this even more fascinating is how quickly everything escalated. One internal decision turned into a ripple effect that's now being felt across the entire organization. Conversations are happening differently, roles are being redefined, and the balance of power inside that locker room is shifting in real time. It's not subtle, and it's definitely not temporary. This feels like the start of something that's going to define the next chapter of this franchise, whether it leads to success or something far more complicated. And the most important part of all this is that we're still at the very beginning. No games have been played, no real results have come in. Everything we're seeing right now is just the setup, the foundation being laid before anything actually counts. But even at this stage, you can already feel how different this is from anything Cleveland has done before. The confidence, the tension, the reactions, it all points to something much bigger than a simple quarterback decision. Because when you take a step back and look at the full picture, this isn't just about who's under center. It's about a franchise finally making a bold, undeniable commitment and dealing with everything that comes with it. And if the early signs are anything to go by, what's happening in Cleveland right now isn't just important, it might be the beginning of something the rest of the league isn't ready for. The moment everything shifted didn't come with a press conference, a headline, or some dramatic public reveal. It happened quietly, behind closed doors, inside the Cleveland Browns facility, where decisions like this carry more weight than anything said in front of a microphone. And when Todd Monken made it clear where he stood, it wasn't framed as a possibility or a competition, it was a declaration. Shedeur Sanders wasn't going to compete for QB1, he already was QB1. That distinction matters more than people realize. In most NFL situations, even when a rookie is highly touted, there's always some level of caution. Coaches talk about earning reps, about proving it in camp, about letting things play out naturally. That language exists for a reason. It protects the organization, it keeps veterans engaged, and it maintains balance inside the locker room. But none of that happened here. There was no safety net built into this decision, no soft landing, just a full, unapologetic commitment that immediately changed the structure of everything moving forward. And this wasn't just about who lines up under center on Sundays. This was about how the entire offseason would be built. Every rep in practice, every installation of the offense, every meeting room discussion, everything is now being designed with one goal in mind: accelerating Sanders' development as fast as possible. That means first-team reps, priority and coaching attention, and a system tailored specifically to what he does best. When a coaching staff operates like that, it sends a signal that goes far beyond football strategy. It tells every player in that building exactly where the future is headed. For a franchise like Cleveland, that kind of certainty hits differently. This is a team that has spent years searching, rotating through quarterbacks, constantly adjusting plans, never fully committing long enough to build something stable. That history is still fresh in the minds of players, coaches, and fans. So when a decision like this comes through, clear, decisive, and immediate, it doesn't just stand out, it feels almost unfamiliar, like the organization is finally done hesitating. Inside the locker room, that kind of clarity creates an instant shift. Offensive linemen start preparing for one voice, one cadence, one style of play. Receivers begin building timing with a quarterback they know isn't going anywhere. Coaches streamline their approach because they're no longer dividing attention between multiple paths. Everything becomes more focused, more intentional. And when that focus is backed by the head coach's full belief, it spreads quickly. Players can feel it. They can see it in how reps are distributed, in how corrections are made, in who gets prioritized when it matters most. But decisions like this don't exist in a vacuum. When one player is elevated this aggressively, it naturally affects everyone else in that room, especially the ones who expected a real shot, especially the ones who thought this offseason would be their opportunity to compete. In the moment that realization hit, the reaction wasn't quiet, because while this decision brought clarity to the organization, it also created tension that couldn't be ignored. And that tension was about to surface in a way no one could control. The shift didn't stay contained for long. Inside the Cleveland Browns locker room, the reaction to the decision started building almost immediately, and the first real crack came from a name that wasn't expected to go quiet: Dillon Gabriel. The moment it became clear that Shedeur Sanders wasn't just being favored, but fully installed as QB1, Gabriel's stance changed fast. This wasn't frustration behind the scenes or subtle disappointment in interviews. This was direct. He wanted out. From his perspective, the reaction makes sense, and that's what makes this situation even more complicated. Gabriel didn't arrive as a placeholder or a long shot. He came in with a real resume, a track record of production, and the belief that he would at least be given a legitimate opportunity to compete. For players wired the way quarterbacks are, competition isn't optional, it's expected, it's part of the deal. And when that opportunity is taken off the table before the process even begins, it doesn't just feel like a setback, it feels like a decision has already been made about your future without you getting a say in it. But the way this unfolded changed the equation entirely. By making his desire to leave known so quickly and so publicly, Gabriel shifted the leverage away from himself. Around the league, teams pay attention to situations like this, and when a player signals that he wants out, it doesn't create urgency, it creates patience. Other organizations know they can wait. They know the Cleveland Browns might eventually have to move him regardless, which opens the door for lower offers and drawn-out negotiations. What started as an attempt to regain control of his career suddenly became a situation where control is harder to find.
And for Cleveland, this creates a different kind of problem, because while the focus is clearly on building around Sanders, roster value still matters. Every asset counts when you're trying to construct a team around a young quarterback, and losing value on a player like Gabriel, whether through timing or perception, complicates that process. It turns what could have been a clean transition into something messier, something that requires careful handling behind the scenes while the public narrative continues to evolve. At the same time, situations like this don't just affect front offices and trade talks. They ripple through the locker room in ways that are harder to measure. Teammates notice when a player checks out mentally. They notice when someone feels pushed aside before they had a chance to prove themselves. It doesn't necessarily divide a room, but it introduces a layer of tension that wasn't there before. Conversations change, energy shifts, and suddenly what was supposed to be a focused offseason starts carrying a different kind of weight. What makes this even more intense is how quickly it all escalated. There was no slow buildup, no gradual realization. One clear decision triggered an immediate response, and now the situation is unfolding in real time with no easy resolution. Gabriel is looking for a path forward, the Browns are trying to maintain value while staying committed to their new direction, and the locker room is adjusting to a reality that arrived faster than anyone expected. But as significant as this reaction is, it wasn't the one that truly changed the tone of everything. Because what happened next didn't just add tension, it took the situation to another level entirely. If the situation felt tense before, it completely shifted the moment Deshaun Watson stepped into it publicly. Because this wasn't a quiet reaction behind the scenes or a carefully worded statement meant to keep things professional. What came out instead caught a lot of people off guard. Rather than taking time to process the decision internally or letting his play speak when the opportunity came, Watson chose to challenge it openly. He questioned the move, pushed back on the idea that the job was already decided, and leaned on his past reputation to make the case that this shouldn't be happening while he's still on the roster. And that's where everything started to feel different, because in a situation like this, timing and tone matter just as much as the message itself. Around the league, when a veteran quarterback faces uncertainty, the usual approach is controlled. You keep things measured, you focus on preparation, and you let the organization handle the messaging. But this wasn't that. This was direct, emotional, and very public. And once it was out there, it didn't just reflect on Watson, it reflected on the entire dynamic inside the Cleveland Browns building. Looking at it analytically, the situation becomes even more complicated. Watson hasn't been consistently on the field in recent seasons, and when availability becomes a question mark at the quarterback position, organizations are forced to think long-term whether they want to or not. Add in the weight of a massive contract and the difficulty of moving that contract in today's market, and you start to see why Cleveland would lean toward a fresh direction. None of that is emotional, it's structural. It's about roster flexibility, future planning, and reducing uncertainty at the most critical position. But instead of aligning with that reality, Watson's response seemed to push against it. By publicly positioning himself as still being the guy, he created a contrast that's hard to ignore. On one side, you have a coaching staff building everything around Shedeur Sanders with full commitment. On the other, you have a veteran quarterback signaling that he doesn't see it the same way. That kind of disconnect doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It raises questions about leadership, about buy-in, and about whether everyone in that room is moving in the same direction. From a strategic standpoint, the impact goes even further.
Any team that might have quietly evaluated the possibility of bringing Watson in now has to consider more than just his on-field ability. They're looking at the full picture: availability, contract size, and now how he handles adversity when the situation shifts. Front offices don't just evaluate talent, they evaluate fit. And moments like this become part of that evaluation, whether a player intends them to or not. Inside the locker room, reactions to something like this are rarely loud, but they're always felt. Players notice how situations are handled. They notice who leans into the team direction and who pushes back against it. It doesn't automatically fracture anything, but it creates a layer of awareness that wasn't there before. Suddenly, this isn't just about a quarterback decision anymore. It's about alignment, about whether everyone is fully committed to where the organization is going.
And that's what makes this moment so significant, because while the initial decision established a direction, Watson's response forced everyone to confront what that direction actually means in real terms. It made the shift undeniable. It brought the tension into the open, and it turned what could have been a controlled transition into something far more visible and far more complex. But while all of this was playing out, while reactions were getting louder and the situation was becoming harder to ignore, there was one person at the center of it all who did the exact opposite. And that silence said more than anything else could. While everything around the Cleveland Browns started to heat up, trade demands surfacing, public comments flying, tension building inside the locker room, Shedeur Sanders did something that almost felt out of place in the middle of all that noise. He stayed completely quiet. No response shots, no subtle messages, no attempt to control the narrative, just work. And in a situation this loud, that kind of silence stands out more than anything you could say. Because most players, especially young quarterbacks stepping into this kind of spotlight, feel the need to respond. They try to defend themselves, prove something publicly, or at least acknowledge what's being said. But Sanders hasn't done any of that. And it's not because he's unaware of what's happening, it's because this environment isn't new to him. Long before he ever stepped into an NFL building, he was operating under a level of scrutiny most players never experience. Long throw analyzed, every decision debated, every success credited to his name, and every mistake amplified beyond the moment. He's been navigating expectations and criticism for years, and through all of it, his approach has stayed the same. Keep it internal, let the work show externally. That background matters now more than ever, because what he's stepping into isn't just pressure, it's layered pressure. You've got a veteran quarterback publicly questioning the direction of the team. You've got another quarterback trying to find his way out. You've got a fan base that's been through enough uncertainty to be both hopeful and skeptical at the same time. And on top of all that, you've got a coaching staff that has made a full commitment to you before you've even taken a meaningful snap. That's a lot to carry, especially this early. But if it's affecting him, it's not showing up in the way people might expect. Inside the building, the focus has been steady. First team reps, consistent timing work with receivers, long film sessions that go deeper than the surface level. There's been talk of advanced tools being used to refine how he reads defenses, ways to speed up decision-making and tighten execution before the season even begins. That kind of investment isn't casual. It reflects a belief that goes beyond potential. And when a young quarterback responds to that belief with discipline instead of distraction, it starts to build something that can spread through a team. And what's also becoming clear is that his presence is influencing how others prepare. When a quarterback approaches the offseason with that level of consistency, it naturally pulls others into that same rhythm. Receivers start dialing in routes with more precision because they know those reps matter. Linemen begin syncing up protections with a clearer understanding of who they're working with. It's subtle at first, but over time it creates a sense of stability that this team hasn't always had. And maybe the most telling part of all this is what he hasn't done. He hasn't tried to claim the moment. He hasn't leaned into the headlines or used the attention to elevate himself publicly. In a situation where he easily could have, he's chosen not to. That restraint, especially in the middle of everything happening around him, suggests a level of control that you don't always see this early in a player's career. Because while others are reacting, adjusting, or pushing back, Sanders is staying centered.
And in a situation filled with movement, that stillness starts to carry weight. It becomes noticeable, it becomes influential, and it quietly reinforces the very thing this organization is trying to build around him. But as steady as he's been, the biggest signal isn't just how he's handling the moment, it's how the Browns are responding to him. And what they're doing next makes this commitment impossible to ignore. What the Cleveland Browns are doing right now goes beyond naming a starting quarterback. This is what a full organizational commitment actually looks like in real time. Because once they made the decision on Shedeur Sanders, everything else started to align behind it, and not subtly either. The way they're approaching roster construction, player development, and even draft strategy all points in one direction. This isn't a temporary move, it's a blueprint.
You can see it clearly in how they're thinking about building the offense. Protection is no longer just a need, it's a priority tied directly to Sanders' development. Every conversation about the offensive line now carries more weight because it's not just about winning games in the short term, it's about creating the right environment for a young quarterback to grow without being constantly under pressure. When a team commits to that idea, it changes how they evaluate talent. It's no longer about filling gaps, it's about building a structure that allows your quarterback to operate at his best from day one. And then there's the other side of that equation, giving him weapons that actually fit with the system demands. This isn't about collecting names or adding random playmakers. It's about finding receivers who can run the full route tree, create separation, and build timing through repetition. Players who can grow alongside him, not just play around him. Because chemistry at that position doesn't happen overnight. It's built through shared reps, shared adjustments, and a system designed to maximize both sides of the connection. And right now, that process has already started. What makes this even more significant is how intentional everything feels. The coaching staff isn't splitting focus. They're not hedging between multiple paths. Every installation, every drill, every teaching point is being filtered through one question. Does this help Sanders develop faster and more effectively? When that becomes the central focus of an offseason, it accelerates everything. The offense starts to take shape earlier, the communication tightens, the margin for confusion shrinks, and suddenly, you're not just preparing for a season, you're building continuity before the games even begin. There's also a noticeable level of investment in how he's being developed mentally. Film work isn't just routine, it's being approached with tools and methods designed to speed up how he processes defenses. The goal isn't just to get him comfortable with the playbook, it's to elevate how quickly he can read, react, and adjust in real time. That kind of detail shows you this isn't about hoping he becomes the guy, it's about actively shaping him into that player as fast as possible. And when you combine all of this, the protection, the weapons, the system, the development, it starts to look less like a roster coming together and more like a plan being executed step by step. Even the defensive side of the ball plays into it. Building a unit that can create pressure, generate turnovers, and control game flow gives a young quarterback better field position in more manageable situations. It reduces the burden early and creates opportunities to grow without having to carry everything immediately. When organizations reach this level of alignment, it sends a message that's impossible to ignore. Players feel it, coaches operate with more clarity, and the entire building starts moving with a shared purpose that wasn't there before. For a franchise that has spent years searching for stability, this kind of unified direction stands out immediately. But when you step back and look at everything happening, the decision, the reactions, the way the roster is being shaped, it becomes clear that this isn't just about supporting a rookie quarterback. This is something much bigger. And when you connect all the pieces, the full picture becomes impossible to ignore. When you zoom out and look at everything happening inside the Cleveland Browns right now, it stops looking like a typical rookie quarterback situation and starts looking like something much more deliberate. This isn't a team cautiously testing a young player to see if he might develop over time. This is an organization aligning every major piece, coaching, roster decisions, locker room structure, around one belief, that Shedeur Sanders is the foundation they've been missing. And once a franchise reaches that level of alignment, the conversation changes completely.
because most rookie quarterbacks are brought into systems that already exist. They're asked to adapt, to learn, to slowly earn trust within a structure that was built before they arrived. That's not what's happening here. In Cleveland, the structure itself is being reshaped to fit the quarterback. The offense is being tuned to his strengths. The supporting cast is being selected with his development in mind. Even the rhythm of the offseason, the way reps are distributed, the way meetings are conducted, has been adjusted to accelerate his growth. That kind of approach doesn't happen unless there's a deep internal conviction that this is the right player to build around. And that conviction is showing up in ways that go beyond strategy. It's showing up in how the locker room is beginning to organize itself. Leadership dynamics start to shift when a quarterback is clearly established as the future. Teammates begin to invest differently, not because they're told to, but because they recognize where things are headed. You start to see alignment in preparation, in communication, in how players hold each other accountable. It's subtle at first, but over time, it creates a culture that feels more stable, more connected, and more purposeful.
There's also a historical weight to all of this that can't be ignored. Cleveland hasn't just been looking for a quarterback, they've been looking for consistency, for identity, for something they can build on without having to reset every couple of seasons. That search has defined the franchise for years, shaping how outsiders view the team and how players experience it internally. So when a move like this happens, when the organization commits this fully and this quickly, it carries more significance than it would somewhere else. It feels like an attempt to break a cycle that's been in place for too long. What makes it even more compelling is how all the moving parts are starting to connect. The coaching staff isn't operating in isolation. The front office decisions aren't disconnected from the on-field plan. The players are beginning to respond to a shared direction. Everything is pointing toward the same outcome, and when that kind of cohesion starts to form, it creates momentum. Not the kind you measure in wins and losses right away, but the kind you feel in how a team prepares, how it communicates, how it carries itself before the results even arrive. And that's why this moment matters so much, because it's not just about whether Sanders succeeds or struggles early. It's about what happens when an entire organization decides to move forward together instead of hedging its bets. It's about what that level of commitment unlocks, both in terms of performance and in terms of identity. When a franchise stops questioning its direction and starts building with purpose, it changes the trajectory of everything that follows. But there's one more layer to this that makes it even more interesting, because as strong as this alignment looks from the outside, it's being tested immediately by the kind of resistance that usually shows up later in a season. And in a strange way, that resistance might be exactly what this situation needs. Every major quarterback story has a moment like this, where things don't line up cleanly, where doubt shows up early, and where the environment feels a little too loud for comfort. And what's happening right now inside the Cleveland Browns fits that pattern almost perfectly. The tension, the public reactions, the uncertainty around how this will all play out. It might look like a problem on the surface, but there's a growing belief that this kind of chaos can actually serve a purpose, especially for a player like Shedeur Sanders. Because adversity at this stage does something that smooth situations never can. It forces clarity. It reveals how players respond when things aren't controlled, when support isn't unanimous, when expectations collide with resistance. And right now, Sanders isn't stepping into a protected environment where everything is designed to make him comfortable. He's stepping into something far more real, a situation where he has to earn belief, not just through performance, but through presence, consistency, and how he handles everything happening around him. There's been a lot of buzz around the league, with some reports suggesting that this internal tension could either fracture parts of the locker room or bring it together faster than expected. It's the kind of speculation that always surrounds bold decisions like this, and while none of it is confirmed, it highlights just how unusual this moment is. When you combine a veteran reaction, a young quarterback being elevated quickly, and a franchise trying to redefine itself, you naturally get friction. The question isn't whether that friction exists, it's what it produces. And historically, some of the most impactful quarterbacks have gone through this exact kind of early resistance.
Not because it's ideal, but because it accelerates development in ways that controlled environments can't replicate. When you're forced to navigate criticism, internal pressure, and constant evaluation all at once, you either get overwhelmed or you sharpen quickly. There isn't much middle ground. And based on everything we've seen so far, Sanders doesn't look like someone who's going to be shaken by it. In fact, situations like this can quietly strengthen a team if they're handled the right way. When players see a quarterback remain steady while everything around him shifts, it builds trust, not overnight and not through words, but through repeated actions. Showing up the same way every day, preparing the same way, staying locked in regardless of what's being said, that consistency becomes a signal. It tells the locker room that the direction the organization chose might actually hold under pressure.
Of course, there's always the other side of it. If the results don't come quickly, if the tension continues to build without resolution, it can create distractions that are hard to contain. That's the risk that comes with making a decision this bold, this early. You're not just committing to a player, you're committing to everything that comes with him, including the scrutiny and the expectations that follow. And those expectations are only going to grow as the season gets closer. But that's what makes this moment so important. Because instead of waiting for adversity to arrive later, Cleveland is dealing with it now. Before the first snap, before the results, before anything is finalized. It's all happening up front, in full view, forcing everyone involved to adjust immediately. And for a young quarterback, that kind of early exposure can either slow things down or speed everything up in a way that changes his trajectory completely. Right now, it looks like it's doing the latter. And if that continues, if this chaos turns into fuel instead of distraction, then what started as a messy offseason could end up becoming the exact foundation this team needed. Which makes what happens next even more important. When you step back and look at everything unfolding inside the Cleveland Browns, it becomes clear this isn't just another offseason storyline that fades once the games begin. This is a full reset of identity built around one decision and carried through every layer of the organization. From the coaching staff's conviction to the roster being shaped in real time, from the tension inside the locker room to the way players are already adjusting, all of it points to something Cleveland hasn't had in a long time, a direction that isn't being questioned internally. At the center of that shift is Shedeur Sanders, and whether people are ready to admit it or not, everything now runs through him. The reps, the system, the future planning, it's all aligned. And when a franchise commits at that level, it creates a different kind of pressure, but it also creates opportunity. Because if he delivers, even at a level that justifies the belief being placed in him, this team doesn't just improve, they transform. The narrative around Cleveland changes, the perception changes, the expectations change, and suddenly a team that spent years trying to stabilize becomes one that others have to prepare for in a completely different way. At the same time, the unanswered questions haven't gone anywhere. What happens next with Deshaun Watson? Is there any path back into relevance for him within this structure, or has that chapter quietly reached its end? And what about Dillon Gabriel? Does he find a situation that gives him the opportunity he feels he's been denied here? Or does this moment define the early direction of his career? These aren't small side stories, they're part of the larger picture, and how they resolve will continue to shape the environment around Sanders as this season approaches. But the biggest question of all is the one no one can answer yet. Just how far can this go? Because when you combine a young quarterback with composure under pressure, a coaching staff fully invested in his development, and a roster being constructed with clear intent, you create the kind of setup that can accelerate faster than expected. It doesn't guarantee success, but it opens the door for something that hasn't felt realistic in Cleveland for a long time: sustained momentum. And that's why this moment matters, not because everything is settled, but because it isn't. Because we're watching the early stages of something that could either redefine this franchise or test it in ways it hasn't been tested before. The chaos, the reactions, the bold decisions, they're all part of the same story, and that story is still being written.
But if the pieces continue to fall into place the way they are right now, if the belief inside that building translates onto the field, then this won't just be a turning point for Cleveland, it'll be a warning to the rest of the league. Because the Browns aren't hesitating anymore. And if this works, the NFL might not be ready for what comes next.